Eiichiro Oda has done it again. In a single chapter, he has proven that he has the chops to put many modern-day romance writers to shame, set up a mystery that will have the One Piece community theory crafting for months on end, delivered one of the most epic yet heartbreaking clashes we've seen in the series yet, and somehow used the birth of two very happy babies to mark the beginning of one of the most historic events in the entire One Piece world. So everyone, grab your popcorn and get your drinks, because it seems like in the very next chapter, we are finally heading to God Valley. Okay, so look, this was hands down a setup chapter, but boy was this the father of all setups. Because walking away from this chapter, it felt like all the pieces of this puzzle were finally falling into place, and we are now that much closer to the God Valley portion of this flashback starting. Like seriously, I wouldn't be surprised if we ended the next chapter with all these heavy hitters landing on God Valley, and if we don't, then Oda, what are we doing? Because as of this moment, we only need to see what treasure was stolen from Pirate Island and brought over to God Valley in order to get Zebek's motivation for storming the island during the hunt. Which, my bet is still on it being Shaggy, even though we do see that by this point in the timeline, Rox has already met and fallen in love with his future wife, and based on the time jump we get at the end, we can assume that she has either already given birth to Blackbeard or is very far along in her pregnancy. And I like the fact that Shaggy is able to tell right away that Rox is basically still faking being as love struck by her as the rest of the pirates at her bar, because thanks to her also being helplessly in love with Rayleigh, she can very easily spot the difference between real and fake affection. It's also kind of funny that it seems to be a running gag on the crew that all the men have absolutely no idea what's going on with Rox, while all the women were able to seemingly take one look at him and realize, yeah, that man's in love. But even with this sudden development, which it feels a little weird to call it that, considering we knew this was coming eventually, but even with this reveal, I still wouldn't be surprised if it was Shaggy being kidnapped that brought Rox to God Valley. Because unless something changes in the next chapter and Rox manages to find one of the two devil fruits he says will be vital for his plan, I don't really see what else the World Gov would see as valuable enough to risk raiding an island full of pirates that is ruled over by the most dangerous crew on the sea. And I can only see them taking that kind of risk if a celestial dragon happened to see a picture of Shaggy and decided he wanted to take her as his slave wife, which that would not go well for them. Because assuming that they're as vulnerable to her looks as the rest of the world has been, she would be running the Holy Land in a matter of hours, if not minutes. Hell, I wouldn't be surprised if when they found her on God Valley, she was sectioned off to some isolated part of the island, being protected by the celestial dragons like she's some kind of queen. Now, there is another reason they might kidnap Shaggy that doesn't involve her being forced to become someone's wife, and that is that they purposely did it to lure Rox to the island in order to catch him in some kind of trap, knowing that no matter what, as someone who is so openly opposed to the World Gov, he wouldn't just sit back and let them take something from him, especially not right from his island, and especially not after what they pulled with Harold. And look, as much as I hate to give that side of the World Gov any kind of credit, if this ends up being exactly what they planned in order to get rid of one of their biggest obstacles, then that was pretty genius. But this is all just speculation. We'll have to wait and see exactly whether or not Shaggy was the treasure they stole from the island, and if they did it in order to force Zebek's hand. This chapter also sets up why Garland was on the island, and why that island in particular was even chosen to be the host of that year's hunt. And it was due to him discovering something special on the island, so special that he was sure even Emu would be excited over his discovery. And ever since the chapter dropped, I've seen some say that it's likely that he found a very powerful devil fruit on the island, maybe even one of the ones Rox was after, but I don't think that's going to end up being the case. The only hint we have as to what it is that it's something he's certain will still be available in 2 years, since that's how long they have to wait in order to hold the next hunt, which is not something that he can be certain about when it comes to a devil fruit. It also likely isn't a resource, since he mentions it as being something separate to the island's natural resources, so it's hard to exactly pinpoint what it might be. But Oda knew exactly what he was doing by adding in that line about it being something Emu would be pleased by, because now the entirety of the One Piece fandom will spend the next week between chapters fiercely theory crafting on what said thing is. And as someone who has absolutely no idea, I'm all for it. Bring it on. I for one am looking forward to seeing all the ideas that you guys come up with. Moving on to Roger though, we don't spend as much time setting up his reason for going to the island in this chapter, but it's as firmly established in his short appearance as Garland's was. Because his sole reason for going is seemingly due to the fact that prior to the event, him and Rox had a battle that he lost, so he was there looking to even the score. And even though this is, I believe, our first time seeing the two interact in this flashback, it does a pretty solid job of setting the two up as rivals. We really don't need anything else from him to get why he was there. Though Oda does a good job of setting up a more compelling reason for his crew to go to the island, because a heavy focus in the beginning of this chapter was centered around the will they won't they relationship between Rayleigh and Shaggy, with Roger surprisingly trying his best to play wingman and hook the two up, despite his vice captain sabotaging it at every turn. But if Shaggy ends up being kidnapped, then that does add another layer to the event and gives more reason for this crew to also raid the island in order to complete the side plot of their romance, and instead of the two being in the relationship we see them in the present day. Also, real quick, I mentioned all the heavy hitters of God Valley showing up in this chapter, but it is worth noting that Garp is mysteriously absent, which isn't too surprising considering when we got our last look at the God Valley incident through Kuma's flashback, we found out he was off on some island enjoying himself on vacation. Well, I say vacation, but based on the conversation he had with Kong, I don't think he was so much given time off. More so he just decided, I don't feel like working that day. And he only cut his vacation short once he heard that Roger was on his way to God Valley. So there really wasn't much of a reason for Oda to showcase him in this chapter, since there really wasn't anything to set up for his reason to be on the island. He wasn't after any sort of treasure or resource like Garling, he wasn't there to take back something stolen from him like rocks, and he wasn't out for revenge over a previous loss like Roger. Garp just heard that Roger was going to be there, so he showed up. It's as simple as that. But as much as I wish we could have gotten all four of them in one chapter, not taking time to focus on Garp in this one meant we could instead pass the screen time that would have went to him over on to Harold, whose part in this chapter really hurt me to read, because while others might have looked at this clash between the two conquerors as one of the most epic battles we've seen in a long time, I saw it as one of the saddest. No joke, reading this fight gave me the same feeling I got from watching Luffy and Usopp. Because despite what Harold would say, the two had become very close, if not best friends at this point, but that friendship was being ripped apart due to their clashing ideals. With Harold seeing joining the World Gov as the only way to save Elbaf from isolation and improve the lives of his people, while Rox knows that joining them would mean bending the knee to Emu and essentially signing up the Giants to becoming nothing more than slaves. And look, based on what we knew about him prior to this flashback, I never thought I'd say this, but I think I'm on Rox's side here. Because he's right, Elbaf basically becoming soldiers working for Emu is not good for the world as a whole. It let them tighten that grip they have over the world even more, and basically end up with Elbaf having an even worse reputation than before, as they'll likely be sent to enforce Emu's will over the non-affiliated islands. But at the same time, I can understand why Harold is struggling with this choice, because the stench of centuries of aggression has clung to his kingdom, and no matter how much he tries to wash it off with his good deeds, its faint smell is still lingering. And joining the world government is the only path forward he can see to completely erase it. Even if it means betraying his friend, as king, he has to do what's best for his people. The two end the clash in a tie, obviously both heartbroken over the whole thing, and the narrator tells us that they won't meet again until a certain incident, which likely means that Harold will be on God Valley as well, though whose side he's on is kinda up for debate. Because while it may seem like he's made his choice to join the World Gov, we do know that he ends up doing something to earn the ire of Emu. So maybe instead of helping them snuff out Rox during this event, he decides to stay neutral. Oh, and it is worth noting that both princes watched the battle go down, so it's going to be interesting going forward to see how this betrayal affects Loki's already strained relationship with his dad. And speaking of kids, we find out at the end of the chapter that Garling might have been doing a little more than scouting on God Valley, because we jump ahead a bit and we meet this woman who is seemingly a local on the island, and with her are her twin sons, Shanks and Shamrock. And when I saw that, I was like, because the idea of their mom not being a celestial dragon never even crossed my mind, and now I want to see the story of how this happened. But with their birth, that's one more check mark on the list of things that need to happen in order to set up this big event. And I'm looking forward to seeing in the next chapter how close we are to God Valley and Zebek's final battle.